How this all got started is almost embarrassing for me, but kind of nice as well. I was a big fan of 65 Days, which sounds weird to say to you guys. And kind of when we were formalizing the ideas and I was thinking about the game a lot, I was listening to you guys at the time, and it's kind of the way my brain works, is that I will think of normally like an emotion that I want to get across in a game, and then kind of think of a particular track. And so that for me was 65 Days. That was Debutante, which we've used on like a lot of the trailers and things like that. Instead of a spaceship flying to a planet, you would be looking at a cube flying to a sphere, but you'd have this track on in the background and it would be like, wow, this game's gonna be great.
Have you done that with the demos that we've sent you?
Yeah.
Do you get the same feeling?
No, yes, actually. And this is why it sounds maybe a little bit embarrassing and there's maybe too much pressure, but you're using the music as inspiration, you know, for the game. Like to me, it very much comes across, you know, when I find them hard to separate. And so it was weird that we asked you guys to license the track, and then we've kind of become friends since then, I think.
We were on tour in America, in the back of a van in the middle of some 10-hour drive or something, and managed to get a little spot of internet.
Yep.
Got this email from Hello Games, and it was, I think you sent screenshots right away. I can't remember what you called it, but it wasn't No Man's Sky, it was some secret name, and it was like, look, we want to use this song for a trailer, and look at this. And we were immediately like, this is proper, that looks like a real thing that's amazing.
I think very early on we said we should email this guy back and say, forget about the trailer, how about that we do the whole game, because that felt obvious to us, and we were looking for a soundtrack project. Did we email you and say that?
You said,
we pretty much did, yeah.
The first contact was actually you guys talking about how you were actually quite into sci-fi and quite into the look of the game and stuff like that, and how aesthetically it struck you.
Playing games as a teenager, like Frontier or whatever, that whole big sort of space exploration thing, and then the front covers of various old like sci-fi, like the paperbacks, the trashier the better, the more outrageous the artwork, the better. A few years ago we got an invitation from Glasgow Film Festival to do a live soundtrack of any film that we wanted to do. We picked Silent Running, that sort of Silent Running.
Very descriptive.
Yes. A wonderful sci-fi film. It went unexpectedly well. We thought it was just going to be 2 nights in Glasgow. We ended up touring it and we turned it into a record. It just made us understand how different making a soundtrack is to making a record.
We were at a time, I guess there had been 10 years of 65 Days of Static, and we'd made a bunch of instrumental records which we're really proud of, but that whole, for want of a better word, scene, particularly in England, probably maybe not so much in America, was becoming very dull to us, really. We really wanted to get involved in other things, really, and soundtrack.
And new forms.
Absolutely.
Just, it feels like there's more places, more things, so many more things you can do with music, but the album as a format, whether it's digital or physical or any of that, the concept of that, I still think it's a completely valid form for a certain type of music, but it needn't be the only one.
I was really flattered because you were like, yeah, we're interested in doing this and we're interested in making this actually much bigger, like you said, which was like mind-blowing to me, because this is a band that I like love, you know, and have been playing non-stop for a year every bloody Friday, you know, to then think, oh no, this could be a real thing and this could like marry up with the music, and that there will be some new music created that didn't exist before and that will be because of the game, you know, like that. I still struggle to kind of get my head around that. So Paul and I actually worked together on our previous game, Joe Danger. He did all the sound for Joe Danger 2, but you've actually been like audio director at a bunch of places like IDOS and Microsoft and things like that. And then I said, we're working on this top secret game. It was called Project Skyscraper at the time, and it's going to be this like sci-fi inspired game, procedurally generated. And you were kind of, I remember you in your way being like quite polite and like, well, it happened, Sean, that I'm like, you know, incredibly into sci-fi, and also I'm really into generative music. And if you look up about generative music, you'll probably find my name.
So one of our ambitions, which we talked about, is to build a music system, a generative music system that you guys could use,
Right.
Which isn't full of numbers and XML, but it's something that's quite intuitive. And I've helped to build and have built several generative music systems before. They've always been technically quite awkward to use, which is fine if it's me, but I really want this to be a much simpler tool so that you can almost drag and drop and apply rules to it. So you can focus on making music you do so brilliantly, but at the same time leverage it in a completely different way.
I don't know what you guys think. You might say we're terrible to work with, but like my attitude has been we're both small teams of people.
Yeah.
And we sort of know how that is. I don't think we do our best work with like constraints or whatever.
It will be like our 7th or 8th kind of record, and we're not really very used to being told what to do, so I guess we kind of got into this maybe thinking, oh, maybe we should try, maybe Sean will tell us what to do, and actually there's been a lot less of that than we expected, so I think
Disappointed.
it's been, well, maybe it's a good thing ultimately.
I think you'll find it is. So I guess it starts there, right? I would show you guys some of the game and stuff like that, and concept art, and you effectively are, I guess, writing an album like you normally would, but with a tone.
I think you've consciously, the way you've done it is to sort of, it's quite a teasing process. We've seen some stuff, but not a lot of stuff, and we're left to kind of creatively, we're fairly empowered, I think, to kind of write a 65 days record, but with sort of caveats that we've given it, and from talking to Paul. So we're sort of making, I guess our brief is to make 65 days of static record, but we know that we're not totally
that meeting where like, we went to that meeting and we were like, right, we were ready, we're going to soundtrack your vision, and you were like, no, don't do that. Like write 65 days music, because that will then
inspire us. Yeah.
Right, and we're like, so it's a bit of a balancing act.
That was the most interesting thing to me. Like, we've already been listening to your music and creating stuff and being inspired by it, and it seemed to miss an opportunity if you guys just created something for the game.
Sure,
you know?
Sure. And also with Paul's, the things we've seen from the audio engines, we've always kind of tried to dip our toes into the world of programming music, but at a very amateurish level, really.
So I guess the idea, right, is to create an album and then sort of rip it to pieces.
It. Yes, absolutely, yeah.
Destroy it.
Yeah.
But break it down into its tiniest component parts, and then play it back generatively, so you never hear it loop. You never hear, because for me that's a big thing. Is like in any game, you normally tire of the music as you go through it. But No Man's Sky is supposed to be this game that's really varied and really different. And if I pick any one track and then I imagine that same track played on like 10 very different planets, that sort of ruins that for me. And we've gone to all this effort to make it procedural and different, and music is such a huge element of that. But
there'll be those key moments. So, the plan is to have those key elements that we do play the music, but most of the time it will be more this ambient soundscape.
Right.
Well, and what I'm really looking forward to is kind of collaborating with you, and working with you, and I'll make some stuff and you'll make some stuff, and really finding that middle ground where it's not about us composing stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of a making of
the alchemy of the sound palettes.
Yeah. It'd be lovely to come out with music which is unpredictable, that we haven't expected to happen.
In a good way.
Every way is a good way.
Suddenly, metal starts playing and we're,
Or dubstep.
Worse. Our fear. But I think, we're also, as part of this, as Paul was saying, we have in mind like key moments, and Paul and I talk about them a lot, and we talk about them a little bit with you guys as well, which there are key moments when you will hear the album in game, and those songs will hopefully be, perfect for those moments.
It's really such a perfect form for this kind of thing, the balancing act, because generative compositions there's so much potential there, but there's like an undeniable strength in something that you can whistle, and you know it's coming at this. Not that you can't whistle generative stuff, but you know what I mean.
No,
like okay.
But you've got
I get the familiarity,
yeah.
the cultural baggage that is attached to.
There's a contrast as well, isn't it? And that's what makes it so powerful. That with ambient music, you're not meant to listen to it, consciously listen to it.
No,
you know,
it's the
it creates a
environment.
mood, an emotion. And then when you come in with beautifully produced linear music, if you like, you know, that has such an impact, even more impact than if it was playing all the time. And it's those moments where you kind of suddenly shift the gear up, where people go, wow, you know, it has a real kind of power to it.
Yeah, you can't necessarily do that in albums
No.
or films in the way that you can here. It's really exciting.
You know, we want something that people are playing for 40 hours, for 100 hours. And that's a difficult thing to soundtrack, you know, and that's what we're trying to do. I guess the key things for me always with No Man's Sky, the things that surprise me is like, we seem to approach people like Paul and like you guys, and we'll say we're doing something really different, and people will generally be excited about that rather than saying, please don't do something different, you know, which is what you expect. And I think that's a benefit of us being like a smaller indie team or whatever, that we can do that. That maybe Call of Duty would find it weird to want to be, you know, generatively soundtracked or whatever.
The way I kind of view it is like I say, you've got the soundtrack, you have the score. You've then got ambient music that sounds like 65 Days of Static.
Right.
You know, where we've kind of, like I said, taken it apart,
Yes.
reworked it, and focused on certain elements.
Exactly.
Maybe removed some of the rhythmic elements, and then there's a kind of third space, which is the real abstract, kind of totally off in ambient, you wouldn't even call it music, or soundscape stuff, where, you know, I'll be doing stuff with you, and that's, you wouldn't normally associate that with music, but you know, in my mind, that is part of the music score.
You're crossing into sound design and all those different elements.
And that's, you know, it's helpful that I'm from that background, because I've been around for so long.
Yeah, right.
You know, I'm so old school that, you know, the early days in games, the same person would do the sound design,
Yes.
the sound effects, and the music. Now, it still happens, but it's not as common. And I really love doing that. I love doing both, so the two can work together.
Right.
And you get so few opportunities, particularly in film, to do that. Whereas games, it's totally perfect.
Absolutely, and we are just an instrumental sort of noise band, but at the same time, the things that we're doing increasingly focus on the how do you say that word, minutiae of sound. I guess over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, we've become much more interested in film sound and sound design. Not that we are sound designers, so there's just an interesting overlap there in what we're good at and also what we're interested in, because we're very bad at sound design, but we're very interested in it.
I mean, this might be too much, but there's a really interesting point we bring there, where, like with minimalism, it's those really small changes that over-exaggerate.
Over a long period of time.
In big dramatic music, in big film scores, everything's changing all the time, and it becomes sometimes quite tiring. But if you're just sitting there and introducing little subtle changes, you can do tremendous amount with small changes.
Right, and if we made a record of those things, we would be deserted by people listening to our band. So a game of this scope gives us the sort of time to make a normal size record and a couple of million years worth of music to
Well, I'm looking forward to that moment where you guys get to just walk around and hear music that you've created, but also that you haven't heard before, because that's how it is for us making the game, where we will land on a planet and we will see, you know, art that we have been involved in the creation of, but is a surprise to us and we didn't see it coming. And that's an amazing feeling. That's the kind of the emotion that we want players to have as well.
I don't play games particularly. I listen to music, and I'm not a gamer. But just seeing the game is insanely exciting game. I don't know. It's hard to describe until people see it, I think. But I don't know if you still feel that when you see it every day. But I don't get to see it very much. But it's a really exciting thing to see happening.
I lose sight of it a lot, and actually collaborations like these, you kind of think, oh right, no, like what we're doing is not that it's important, but there's like this artistic element to it, you know, that is important to me. Like there's an amazing thing, the idea that somebody will land on a planet, no one will have seen it before, they can record like themselves playing it, and not only are the visuals different, but the music that's being played is unique to that moment and might never be heard again, is amazing, you know, and that's kind of super exciting for me.
So, I mean, wherever possible, we want to tie in parameters of a game into the music system. And we may break those parameters at certain times, whatever makes sense to us. But I'm really keen on this idea that we take maybe the seed of a planet, the inherent number that represents a planet, and use that in a way that the players won't be aware of, but we're using it to drive change into the music system. And one of the things which is, I think, really powerful here is because it's such a small team that, you know, we can decide on these things and it doesn't have to go to committee, you know. We don't
That's kind of what I was trying to get to before. It's like,
and it's so refreshing that you can go, well, we can do this,
right,
and we can do this. And
half the time you tell me about things after you've already done them.
Yeah, I do that as well. That's always the best approach.
I've done this thing.
Don't tell him. Yeah. And again, that's what it used to be like in the old days. I mean, you probably remember making games where you did. I'm not. You know, we didn't have all these layers to go through, and I'm sure it's like that in record business. You know, often there are layers to go through.
Yeah, well, we've mainly managed to avoid them actually by being radically unpopular, or at least, we never sold enough records for it to be a problem that someone needs us to sell that many records again. It's always been disappointing for somebody else.
In terms of key moments where I feel like we will use actually the music from the album directly. I guess some of them are kind of obvious, like the very moment you start up the game. When you reach the center of the galaxy, I would have in mind that there will be a track that will fit that, and we're not going to talk about it too much, but that is a really key moment in the game. But even little things like the very first time that you dock in a space station, those are moments, you know, like when you get into your ship for the first time and you fly out into space. They are key emotional moments, something that we've talked about. There's this brilliant moment in Red Dead Redemption that I love, where you have to go to like New Mexico, I think it is, about halfway through the game, and you just go on a horse ride and this track kicks in that has vocals for the first time. It's one of my favorite moments in a game. And afterwards I went and looked it up to try and look for videos of it, and you see people talking about it again and again and again, like that was their favorite moment of the game, which is crazy because it's like full of action and full of like all these carefully designed key moments, but really just a little moment of boredom actually, you know, of making you look at the landscape and just take it in, and the right music, and suddenly it lifts it, you know, and that's kind of how it should be. That's what a soundtrack's all about, and so that's what we would want, that people aren't even noticing the music, and then there are these key emotional moments, other ones that we have in mind as well for certain discoveries that players will make and things like that. And the nature of the game means that some people will never make those discoveries, and so they will never hear those tracks, and that's cool. I like that, you know, as well.
And one of the things that I've manifestly failed to do in my career is affect level design for audio.
Yeah.
You know, and there are moments, and I have tried, where I've gone, well, actually, you know, you might want player to go from A to B really, really quickly, but if we just take our time, because I've got a beautiful piece of music or sounds and it would fit really nicely and really set the atmosphere, and of course they don't do that. It's like, no, you have to go from A to B, but we can do that. You know, so if it's a key moment that we want to extend specifically to incorporate this music, we can do it, because it's, you know.
And this sounds really bad, and this is something I shouldn't say on camera, but like games, they do like excitement really well at the moment, but they kind of don't do any other emotion very well. And a lot of those emotions take time, you know, for you to actually experience them, whether that's empathy or loneliness or vulnerableness or whatever. You know, those are things that you need space to do, and in a lot of games, a lot of AAA games, I always feel, I joke, there's somebody sat there with a timer, you know, and if an explosion hasn't gone off in like 15 seconds, you know, every 15 seconds they're like, we're losing them, you know, like, cue the explosions, like we need at least 3 more in here, and it leaves no room for the game to breathe and for you to, like, sounds really pretentious, but like to just feel something, and I think if we can get that across, if there are those moments.
But like we can do those moments by, you know, we can reward players sometimes for just experiencing the environment. Not that you need to, it's not a key gameplay element, But I mean, this is stuff of sound that I want to do, where if you just want to have a look at how beautiful it is, you'll be rewarded in some way in the sound for that. And I want to have those beautiful moments that have nothing to do with what you're trying to achieve, but it's just a beautiful moment.
Film scores, there's so much going on at the moment, which is really, really exciting.
And I think in terms of games that, whether you would be aware or not as much, but that doesn't really happen. You know, games do fall into a real bracket in terms of soundtrack.
Yeah, you get some indie games, like Limbo is a good example, and Journey as well, where they do something really interesting, you know, with music and sound design. But you were right in that the mainstream games tend to all sound like kind of like Hans Zimmer, over the top. Although to be fair to Hans Zimmer actually doesn't sound like Hans Zimmer. He's actually much more interesting than that. But you get that kind of
I understand, yeah.
kind of cliched, over the top, kind of pseudo film music. It's just not terribly interesting. And the worst criticism I can make about a lot of game music, and now I alienate everyone out there, and everyone will hate me, is that you can kind of take a lot of the music and swap it for a different game and it makes no difference, right? And that for me is like, it's not ideal, right? You want to make something that's particular to your project, that has that feel. When you come back to it, it reminds you, it evokes that world.
We use, normally the typical thing is you do the trailer with dubstep, and then you do kind of an orchestral...
Oh, I get all the dubstep jokes.
Orchestral soundtrack. And the two were like totally separate. And I think for us, we were like, this is the music of No Man's Sky, because this is what we've been listening to for so long. And we want the trailer to feel representative of the game and the emotion that you get across, kind of thing. We have, you know, done edits to dubstep, but it hasn't worked very well.
Not with me, you haven't.
They were slightly jokey.
I feel like we're sort of in the eye of the storm. I don't know if it's like that for you, but a few of our friends know what we're doing, and a few people I spoke to have heard of the game. A couple of our friends who play a lot of games are insanely excited in a way that I haven't quite got my head around. But I think when the game comes out, it's going to be really something. And, hopefully the whole collaboration will kind of transcend 65 days or anything like that. It will just be a great thing. That's what we feel we're working towards. And if the soundtrack record's good, I really hope it's good, and I hope people download it or maybe even buy it. But if we pull this thing off that you're doing and you're doing and we're doing, then it feels like it could be really special.
Yeah, I think...
It's a tightrope, isn't it? There's no certainty.
There's no... Like, a lot of the choices that we're making in the best possible way, it's not really focused towards, like, sales. None of us have had that conversation of, like...
Not really interested, are we? It's like just much more interested in the game.
I think, you know, artistically, this is an interesting thing to do. You know, it might be a terrible car crash by the end of it, but everything that I've heard so far doesn't seem that way.
We're so far from even thinking about best case scenarios these days after being in a band for 13 years.
Like, this is not what we're going for.
We've had an absolutely crazy... We've been writing for, well, kind of a year, but we've been writing probably for 2 months, and it's been insane, but it's already loads of fun. Like, if it all stopped happening tomorrow, as things invariably do, it would have been great so far anyway, so it can only go up, really. Yeah.
If the game's as good as it promises to be associated with it is going to be incredible. And if you pull it off, imagine like you'll have opened the doors for something like some amazing things in the future. Because it's just like it's like a beacon, you know, from what I see of the games world, which isn't an expert perspective, but you know, it's a bit like Hollywood. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of very obvious stuff going on. And if something is as cool and as interesting as this can succeed, it's going to show other people that they can do something cool and interesting too.